YouTube, what's going on? FS Boat, check it in. Hope everyone is doing well. We got a good one today. We're going over my college football 2024 postseason conference tier list. Before we get into this one, I love the support. I appreciate you guys so much. It means the world to me. I'll be in the comments just chatting, bruh. So if I don't reply to your comment, I promise it's non-personal. It's just sometimes I see something, I'm like, ooh, that's a good comment. I'm the open-minded guy. So even if you're a little negative and I don't come negative, I promise you I can bring that energy if you really need it. But most of the time, I'm going to stay chill. But besides that, appreciate all the love. Keep commenting. Keep showing the support. Videos are going to keep coming. I promise that. But anywho, into our tier list. Okay, one thing before we get going. This is based off of two things. Well, yeah, two things. Where each of the teams in the conference is finished at the end of the season. And secondly, my own opinion. So, which one outweighs the other, I couldn't tell you. But this is simply my opinion. If you have your opinion, that's why we got a comment section. I'm never going to block off the comment section. I don't care what happens. We could get blown out 74-0 by Boise State next year. You know what I'm saying? That comment section is always going to be open for you. So if you got an opinion, boom, put it in the comment section. Let me know what you think. You know, I was going to start with the Power 4 conferences first, but just so we can have a little fun, let's start with the group of 5 teams first. Kicking it off, we have the Pac-2 D-rank automatically. No offense to Washington State and Oregon State, but you simply just have 2 teams. I understand you're getting it figured out, but next season, you still just got 2 teams. So as of right now, you're D tier. I believe you'll come up in tier once you get your new additions. But right now, D tier, no shade, no trolling. I'm dead ass. That's just where you belong. If you feel some type of way about it, what can I say? You know what I mean? Leave a comment. I just work here. Anyway, steering away from the Pac-12. Next up, we're going with the MAC. The main thing about the MAC, and this happens to be their situation all the time, sometimes it teams swap around, but they always have a solid like top 5 teams. In this case, this year is Ohio, Miami of Ohio, Bowling Green, Northern Illinois, and Toledo. Buffalo also had a great season. But after that, it drops off drastically. I mean, those teams are all well into the top 100 ranks of teams. Then once you get to that back half, you got about 5, almost 6 teams in the 120s. So, you know what I mean? It's just strong top half of the conference, but that back half is definitely holding them back a bit. Don't get me wrong. I love midweek action. I promise I do. This is not a diss. I love it so much. But the MAC first team to make it into that C tier. Next conference we're looking at, we have the Conference USA. Actually fallen in as the lowest ranked conference in the FBS. I think this year was a little weird. We kind of all expected Liberty to sweep the slate, you know what I mean? They couldn't get it done. Some of the teams are viewed as so bad that even the teams that are winning 9 or 10 games are in the 90s in their ranking. So, for example, I looked at Sam Houston. It jumped off my screen. Sam Houston went 10-3 this year. They're the 94th ranked team in all of the FBS. You know what I mean? So yes, half of it is strength of schedule, and that 94th rank may just be a byproduct of, once again, another conference having some of the worst teams in the FBS. They have about 4 teams looming in that 130 range. Mind you, there's only about 135 FBS teams. So the bottom half of that conference is definitely making it harder for these other teams to compete. So yeah, Conference USA with the lowest power index ranking average in the FBS. Crazy to see it. Next up, we have the American Conference. In my opinion, arguably you could say the best group of 5 conference in the FBS. Thing about the American that's kind of crazy is their top teams are so good that they carry some of the worst teams in all of the FBS and still have a pretty high ranking. Their ranking this season was an average of 90. Wow, some people look at it and say 90 is crazy. We're looking at a totally different ballpark. Once you get into the back end of some of those Power 4 conferences, you literally got to lose all your games in the Power 4 conference for them to even rank you anywhere in the hundreds. Look at it like that. So the fact that they're at 90 is pretty impressive, especially looking at, for example, they got Tulsa. Tulsa's the second to worst team in all the FBS. They got Temple's at 127, Charlotte's at 121, UAB's at 118. They got some of the worst teams in there, and their top half is just so dominant with Tulane and Army and Memphis and Navy this year. South Florida put together a great team. UTSA had a decent year this year. Their top half is just so solid that I think they will stand firm in being the best group of 5 conference because they just have so much competition in that top half. And like I said, they kind of got the opposite of what the Conference USA got going on. They have so much competition in the conference that, okay, if Tulane does lose a couple games, but they can figure out how to beat a Memphis and figure out how to beat an Army, they can possibly make their way into the college football playoff. But in a conference like the Conference USA, it's like, man, if you could beat the other three best teams in the conference, and the rest of the country is going to be looking at you like just another team. So, shout out the American Conference, hell of a season. Shout out the academy schools went crazy this year. Memphis was fun to watch. East Carolina was also a lot of fun to watch. But yeah, nonetheless, American Conference, to see how great we do next year. In terms of conference realignment, I'm not really surprised they're staying firm. If I was them, I'd stay firm too. They're doing pretty well as it is, so no reason to jump off the ship now. Next up, we got the Sun Belt. Sun Belt's getting placed in the B tier, right next to the right next to the American Conference. When I look at the Sun Belt, I look at it as just a well-rounded conference. Besides that, they didn't have any teams in the 120s. They got teams creeping into the teens, but you look at the top of that conference. Marshall had a year. James Madison, Texas State, South Alabama. All these teams are playing solid football, and like I said, they have the ability to beat each other, which will give them favorable rankings. You know what I mean? Their conference power index ranking, I had them about 88.1. When we're comparing that to the other teams, they stack up right there with so their postseason conference power ranking, I have them at 88. So pretty solid conference. It's interesting to see what Texas State will do in the future, but nonetheless, shout out the Sun Belt, hell of a season. Last but not least, of the group of 5 teams, we have the Mountain West Conference. See, I'm a little iffy on this one. I was gonna send them down to C, and I know y'all be happy, but I think they belong in B, and here's my reasoning. When we look at their average pre-separation, this is the main important thing. This is pre-separation. Those teams still have one more year in the Mountain West Conference. So pre-separation, they're at a 93.3 on the season power index. That stacks up right next to the Sun Belt, about 88. The American was about 90, and the MAC was at 103, and Conference USA was at 109. So they're right there in the mix with the American and the Sun Belt. The Mountain West looking solid. The top 4 or 5 teams are really solid teams. Top 4 teams, I should say. Fresno State had a little bit of an off year, but that's fine. They'll be back and running next year. Then we got a lot of average teams. Like I said, Nevada went 3-10. For some reason, they're still ranked 103rd. That means they're playing good football. So at the end of the day, Mountain West looking solid. They're dealing with a bunch of things. Teams are going, teams coming. So yeah, last season of the Mountain West Conference as we know it. Should be a whole lot of fun. Let's see what happens. Now, to the part of this video that should be the least controversial. Looking at the ACC, sitting at an average of 51, they are the lowest ranked Power 4. Now, what could play into this? There was a couple things. Florida had a really bad year. Florida State had a really bad year. So a team that you normally would see in the top 20s in terms of power index ended up at like 90 or wherever they ended up. So next year, I'd expect them to be right next to the Big 12. But as of right now, when we're looking at the ACC is the lowest Power 4 conference in terms of power index. Let's see if they could change it up going into the next season. Next up, we have the Big 12. The Big 12. First year with the expanded Big 12. I guess I could have said the same thing about the ACC. When we look at the Big 12, a lot of people kind of talked about the Big 12 as if they aren't an elite conference, but in terms of power rankings, the Big 12 is pretty solid top to bottom. You know what I mean? It was a little bit of a weird year. Some of the teams that they said would be the worst in the conference ended up being the best, but that's fine. There was a few teams that had off years. Like, I don't expect Utah to be playing 5-7 football for long. I don't expect Arizona to be playing 4-8 football for long. But nonetheless, great first year in the Big 12. Like I said, their conference average ended up being 43. 43, ladies and gentlemen. Ranked 3rd amongst Power 4 conferences. That's pretty solid for the first year of the Big 12. I don't know, the Big 12 is kind of like a interesting collection of teams. All these teams can be very good given the right situation. Who's to say You can't look at the standings and tell me it's going to be the same thing next year. Anybody can beat anybody. Big 12 football, in my opinion, I seen someone say it on Twitter, it is America's conference. You got a little bit of everything sprinkled in there, and you show up and they play ball every single time. You never know what's going to happen. So Big 12 football, hell of a season. It was a whole lot of fun to watch the Big 12 this year. I can't wait to see what all these teams do in the offseason. Second to last, we got the Big 10. Big 10 S tier, of course. So some people are going to ask, so you guys probably could have guessed the Big 10 is automatically S tier. If you're asking about their ranking, interesting enough, their ranking was only 42. A couple of things could lead into this. For one, the conference has about 25 freaking teams in it. For two, Purdue was very bad. Purdue was the 120th best team in the country. Put it like this, the next worst team in the conference is 89th. So if Purdue wasn't as bad, they'd be at about 37, which seems like a little more correct. But nonetheless, Big 10 finishes with the average power ranking this season of 42, just 1 point behind the Big 12. Now, some of you guys are going to say, well, Thomas, if you said they're 1 point behind, why isn't it? Like I said, it's what we saw this season as well as my opinion. In my opinion, some of the dudes running around in the Big 10 are some of the best football players in the country. The top half is just crazy. Even when you get into things like Minnesota and Iowa, like teams like that are just so dominant, but they play in a conference with other great teams. And the schedules are so weird. I don't know what's going on there, but they'll figure it out eventually. So yeah, Big 10, the second best conference this year in my opinion. And that leaves just one conference, the SEC, taking their throne at the top. I know a lot of you guys don't want to admit it, but that the best football is probably played in the SEC. You know what I mean? It is getting a little weird with the NIL stuff, and some of the stuff going on in these conferences are a little weird, but don't get it twisted. The football we see in the SEC is crazy. So the SEC taking the top spot, the average football power index in the SEC this year was 22. Mind you, that is the difference. You guys are saying, what's the difference between the SEC and the Big 10? The Big 10 won the championship, blah, 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 blah. One conference was at 42. The other conference was at 22. And does the fact that some conferences have 20 teams, some conferences have 15, yes, all that matters. But nonetheless, that's a big difference. Closing thoughts. I know some of us don't like the disparity between these two conferences and everyone else, but put it like this. There's about 35 five-star recruits, right? 21 of them committed to play in either the SEC or the Big 10. So I understand some of these kids transfer out and end up at different schools, but as of right now, the best football is played in these two conferences, and that's no diss to any of the other ones. But nonetheless, let me know how you guys feel about my final tier list. Like, comment, and subscribe. Appreciate all the support. I will see you in the next one. Gang, gang.